Good morning. During his recent visit to Eastern and Central Europe, External Affairs Minister Jaishankar, while interacting with the Austrian television, made two observations on China which are not correct. India has a disputed border with China, which is called the line of actual control. China is a major power. Militarily, it is much stronger, and hence it is important that India's perspective of every event that it has with China should be put properly into its foreign policy. Otherwise, India may just end up in a war with China, a war in the near future which it cannot win. And this will jeopardize India's geopolitical rise. And this is why I'm doing the video to basically put what Jaishankar has said, his observations on China, in proper context. Please listen in to what the External Affairs Minister said on China.
Okay, let's change the subject. You frequently said that India has a very complicated relationship with your neighboring China. Many people around the world are quite concerned that China might, in the near future, intervene militarily in Taiwan. Do you share this concern?
I think there's a larger concern which is based on our experiences. The concern is that we had agreements with China not to mass forces in our border areas. And they have not observed those agreements, which is why we have the currently tense situation that we do. We had an agreement not to unilaterally change the line of control, which they have tried to unilaterally do that. So there is, I think, a perception that we have which derives directly from our experiences. Now, where else the status quo may change or not change, I would hesitate as a foreign minister to predict publicly. I may have my own views and assessments. But I certainly can share my experience, and my experience is that written agreements were not observed, that we have seen levels of military pressure which in our view has no justification.
China would say the opposite. They would say that India had not obeyed different agreements. But obviously, you see
No, I think it's difficult for China to say that for this reason. The record is very clear because today, there's a lot of transparency. You have satellite pictures. If you see who moved the forces to the border areas first, I think the record is very clear. So it's very difficult for China to say what you suggested they could.
Jaishankar has made two observations on China. One, that both sides they had an agreement not to mass the troops close to the border, and China did not respect this agreement. His second observation is that both sides agreed not to alter, not to change the line of actual control, and China tried to do it. First of all, I may correct the minister. If media reports are to be seen, the media reports make it very clear that China did not try to change the LAC, the existing LAC. They are already, since the last 2.5 years, since April 2020, they are sitting on 2,000 square kilometers of Indian territory. This is the reality. Now, Jaishankar has put the entire blame and these two agreements on China that they did not observe these agreements. The reality is different. Let me now take the first point. It is absolutely correct that in 1996, both the sides had an agreement not to mass the troops. But 1996 was the year when Chinese geopolitical ambitions were still 2 decades away. So in 2016, when under Xi Jinping, the PLA did its major military reforms, it created the Western Theatre Command, the geographically largest command of the PLA, with the sole job of fighting a war with India. Now the problem here was, when you create a command, when you create a corps, when you create any formation of the army, you have to get the troops there, otherwise it is meaningless, and they have to be there and train also there. So their problem was how to get their troops in the Tibet Autonomous Region close to the border and train there. Because there were two issues coming in the way. The first was the 1996 agreement which they had signed, and the second was China's stated military strategy of active defense. Active defense, which has been their strategy right from Mao Zedong's time, basically means that China will never be the aggressor. But if China is threatened, China will fight back with full force on enemy soil. This is active defense. That means China will only fight in self defense. So, here was the challenge: how to get their troops into the Western Theatre Command without being seen the aggressor and putting the blame entirely on the Indian side, Indian military. This is when they came up with the Doklam plan. Now, when they were debating perhaps the Doklam plan, they were aware of two major shortcomings of the Indian side. The first was the shortcoming of the Indian government. They were aware that since May 2014, when Narendra Modi became the Prime Minister of India, his ministers have always, at the first opportunity, tried to build an image of a Prime Minister which is larger than life, a Prime Minister, only Prime Minister who has been able to take on Pakistan and China simultaneously. And they knew the example of this was the 2016 so-called surgical strikes. And the second was they were aware that the Indian military since independence had been so much focused on Pakistan that they were not keeping a track, they were not keeping themselves abreast of the advances in warfare where the PLA was at the cutting edge. So they knew that at Doklam, where they wanted to create a crisis, the Indian military will still be thinking tactically the tactics of the 17th and the 80s, because it will not be aware of the capabilities the PLA had acquired in 2016, and precisely this is what happened. Now, Doklam is a small plateau. You have on the east side of Doklam is Bhutan, on the west side is Sikkim, and Sikkim is held in strength, all the heights, by the Indian Army. And in between is a valley called the Chumbi Valley. This belongs to China. Now, as far as Doklam is concerned, Chinese claim Doklam, Bhutanese also claim Doklam. Because India has a special security relationship with Bhutan, in fact, in case of a crisis, something like one division of the Indian Army will be there in Bhutan to help them. So the Indians feel compelled to come to the help of Bhutanese army, especially at a place where they are tactically placed in an advantageous position. And the Chinese knew this. Now, south of Doklam is a ridge called Jampheri Ridge, which overlooks the Siliguri corridor. Siliguri corridor is a narrow strip which combines mainland India with its northeastern state. If Siliguri corridor was to be cut, then India will not have a physical link at all with the northeastern states. And hence it is important strategically, the Siliguri corridor. But what the Indian side, the PLA, was very, very clear would not realize is that they would still be thinking about the 80s tactics. And that is that to deny the PLA a road so that they can bring large forces onto the Doklam and come and sit on Jampheri Ridge, provide observation to their fire backs, in the rear, which could then accurately target Siliguri corridor. Why? Because in 2016, the PLA has satellites which can give excellent situation awareness up to a resolution of 5 meters. Then they have all sort of drones. So round the clock they will have the surveillance, and they have standoff weapons, precision standoff weapons at long ranges which can hit the Siliguri corridor. What is the need for them to come and sit physically there at the Jampheri Ridge? But obviously the Indian military leadership, they still felt that this was very important, they should be denied this. So What did the PLA do? They first got in touch with the local commander, said, we wanted to talk to you, we want to build a track which will run all along the all along the Sikkim corridor, Sikkim line, which is held by the Indian side, and come to the Doklam Plateau, which they said belongs to them. So, on the 18th of June, they brought in the dozers. The Indian, and they were bang on. The Indian side, they were instructed by Delhi to stop the dozers in the track. Indian side also brought in the dozers and blocked their bulldozers. They were blocked. The Indian side saw in this an opportunity that if you could stop the PLA in the tracks, then the Prime Minister image will get boosted. And that will obviously help in the 2019 general elections. But as far as our local commander was concerned, the Eastern Army commander, he knew that suddenly their wolf warriors, they also went into action, knowing fully well that they had no intention to start a war at a place where they get nothing. They started beating the war drums. So much noise was made in the Chinese media that the Indian commander felt compelled to ask for more forces just in case there's an escalation. So there was an accretion of forces on the Indian side. Now, PLA in self-defense, as I said, according to their military strategy of active defense, they also brought in the forces saying that, look, the Indian side may escalate. Finally, when the situation was diffused after 74 days, Indian side did not have a habitat. They went back. The additional troops were sent back. The PLA never went back. So this was the time when the PLA did not go back. They should have been reminded by Jaishankar that, look, you are breaching the 1996 agreement. But it was not done. It was not done because a victory was declared by India. Doklam was declared a victory. So how could Jaishankar at that time say that, look, the PLA has brought in a lot of troops and not respected this agreement? Not only that, the Indian military commanders, they told me, for example, the then Eastern Army commander, later Army Chief, General Naravne, when I asked him, I said, look, they brought in a lot of troops in the Tibet Autonomous Region. He says, well, good, that's good. Because all these years since 1993, our troops used to sit at heights of 15,000, 18,000. Let them also know how it is to be at these heights. I mean, what a way of thinking. So, when and if India gets into a war with China, it will be recorded that the beginning of the biggest blunder done by the Indian state and the Indian military, it was Doklam, where we allowed, in self-defense, what they say, the PLA to bring their forces there. So put into perspective, they cannot be blamed today. Let's see the other issue that Jaishankar has raised, where he said that there was an agreement not to alter the line of actual control. Well, actually, India did it first. On 5th of August 2019, after revocation of 370 in Jammu and Kashmir, new maps were created. Union territory of Ladakh was created and Jammu and Kashmir Union territory was created. As far as Chinese were concerned, they said that, look, there was never a border, which is the truth, between Xinjiang military region of theirs and Ladakh. So, Jaishankar travelled on 11th August 2019 to China to explain to his counterpart that, look, nothing has happened on the ground. It is only that we have made the maps, which means nothing. They said, no, this is cartographic aggression. You please, this is unacceptable to us. Because as early as 2010, they had made it public. Chinese ambassador in Delhi had publicly said that China's border with India is only 2,000 square kilometers, which is minus Ladakh. Whereas the Indian side said that, look, the border is 3,488 kilometers. And the Chinese reminded the Indian side, Jaishankar, that, look, until the last day that British India was not there and the Britishers left the subcontinent, they were trying consistently to get Peking to agree to a border between Ladakh and Xinjiang, and the Chinese did not agree. So, Xi Jinping could have ordered the August 2020 then only. He didn't do that. Why? Because he was still looking for a peaceful resolution. So, what the Chinese side said is that look, this year, the second informal summit between Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi is in India, so you give us the dates for it. Now, India was being very cagey about giving the dates, knowing fully well that he'll come here and he'll talk about the 5th August 2019 issues, especially when Pakistan was putting a lot of pressure on China to go and take their case and talk their case with India. So much so that the Indian side, they had a army exercise called Him Vijay in October, which is the date that they had given to China for the second informal summit. This exercise was held in the state of Arunachal Pradesh, which India knows displeases, is not acceptable to the Chinese side. Chinese were cleverer. What did they do? The Chinese ambassador in Delhi said, the exercise the world could see, and he said that there is no existence of the exercise. There is no exercise. And he came here. Xi Jinping came in October, met Prime Minister Modi at Mahabalipuram near Chennai. And the readout of the Indian side was that only trade was discussed, Jammu and Kashmir was not discussed. Wrong. Because on the way back, Foreign Minister of China Wang Yi told the press that two things were discussed. She discussed with Modi. Number one, she emphasized that there should be peaceful relations between India and Pakistan, India and China, and Pakistan and China. This, he said, is imperative for regional peace. Number two, taking forward the first informal summit which was held in Wuhan, where the two sides had agreed. The details are there in my book, The Last War, where the two sides had agreed on the formula of China, India plus one nation, which basically means that China and India, in a collaborative, in a cooperative fashion, will look at the infrastructure and the development of the small countries in South Asia, for example, Nepal. So then it would become China, India, Nepal, China, India, Afghanistan. This is the formula they agreed on, but it was not honored as far as China is concerned by India after Modi won the 2019 general elections. Now, Xi Jinping gave a further emphasis on this by saying that look, not only we should have China, India, South Asia, we should even have China, India, Southeast Asia, China, India, Africa. All this was suggested. But when they went back, nothing happened. India had no intentions of doing this. So, what did the Chinese do? Their troops were already there. They were doing the exercise, looking at an opportune time. In April 2020, they did multi-pronged attacks, and they just came and occupied the territory, Indian territory. What does this tell us? This tells us that our diplomats, Indian analysts, who've been given building of infrastructure by India as the main reason for China for doing its April 2020 are absolutely wrong. Why wrong? That if she actually wanted to do that, if China was disturbed, or if their war that they intend to have against India was getting hampered by India's infrastructure, what was the need for Xi to actually seek a meeting with a reluctant Modi and come to Mahabalipuram? He could have ordered the this attacks much earlier. So we need to put all this in perspective. Thank you.